Hi everyone, my name is Naya Show and this is the Meditation Matters podcast. We're on to another lovely interview with Lisa we have here, and I'll let her to go in and completely identify herself and everything that she does. But yeah.
So my name is Lisa Cuevas. I am a poet, a painter. I work in the nonprofit field. I actually recently transitioned to higher ed, but I identify, of course, as an artist and as a feeler, a light worker.
Right. Yeah. See, I like that. That's awesome. All right, cool. So I'm going to go in and jump into it. And so how would you define, in your experiences, how would you define vulnerability?
Okay. So I feel like this is so good. So we jump right in. Okay. I feel like if you would have asked me that 10 years ago, I would have seen vulnerability as a weakness, right? Or as, being overexposed, a target open to attack, right? And now I see vulnerability as a strength. And that doesn't mean that vulnerability itself or what it takes or looks like to be vulnerable has necessarily changed, so much as the way that I have been able to use vulnerability more as a tool than as a weapon against self, right? Or others, right? I think sometimes people maybe my past self, right, would have seen a person who was demonstrating their vulnerability and I don't want to say weaponized it, but I was more careless with that, right? I wasn't as aware of what a gift that really is until you get older and you start to become more aware of yourself and about how that really is a strength. And you start to see how the withholding of vulnerability can actually be a huge barrier.
Definitely. See, I like you said a couple great things there that were like gifts and tools and you mentioned barriers. So I want to jump into the tool part first.
Sure.
So how do you use vulnerability now? Like how do you allow yourself to be raw?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there's so many ways, right? There's how your vulnerability shows up in your art, right? In your work. As a poet, a lot of that, there's a great responsibility to take some of the sort of ugliest, most difficult things in the world and present them in a beautiful way. And I think a lot of that is not so much that it's being tied up with a pretty bow as it is that it's being laid out pretty bare as it is, right? And that's such a rare thing, a rare thing that happens in the world and just in general, that it's like, wow, this is beautiful, but that's really people recognizing the beauty and pain, And also like using it as a tool in relationships. I think that when it comes to growing with people, there has to be a level of honesty and rawness. And we can't do that if we're not in touch with the painful parts of ourselves, right?
I agree.
And being in touch with the things that aren't really that comfortable, right? I think vulnerability is extremely uncomfortable, and I think what we want is a safe space to be ourselves. And there's maybe a little bit of a misconception that safety means comfort, and to some degree that may be true, right? I feel safe. If I feel safer, I feel more comfortable. But it's still, vulnerability is still one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm carrying it, here it is, it's not easy, it's heavy, it's scary, it's complex. So I think in using it as a tool in the art, it's to connect with people. Using it as a tool in relationships, it's to say, it's really just showing up as yourself, and that is work, and vulnerability, as opposed to using it, again, I mentioned it being a barrier, instead of using it as like, well, this is a reason I can't grow with you. Using it as a means of connecting with people, because there's so much that we have in common that's so deep within the recesses of our minds and souls and histories and traumas, that if we just shared a little bit of that, we would realize that we have more in common than we think, and that we have the capacity to understand each other in ways that go beyond that immediate sort of compatibility measure or metric.
Ooh, wow. Okay. I'm just like digesting everything. I'm just like, this is all great information.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's helpful.
No, it really is. So I'll give a little bit of background before why I even wanted to start a whole series about exploring what vulnerability is, what it means. So when I moved here to Philadelphia about maybe 5 months ago or whatever, and like reasons why I moved, because I just felt like trapped at home, and I didn't really understand that, right? So then as soon as I moved here, I was like, okay, I'm all alone, and then like I plunged into realizing I had so much to heal from and so much to unpack.
Yes.
So it took me diving into a very deep and raw, vulnerable space with myself that I thought I had gone before, but I did not.
Yeah. There are layers.
I knew nothing about it. Actually, even the other day, after I had like a therapy appointment, and afterwards, like I got in there, she was like, I feel like you're not being honest with me. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm sitting here telling you things like, what?
How could you say that to me?
And she was like, we haven't really talked about your family. And she was like, that's something that you don't really seem to talk about.
Yeah.
So she was like, we think we need to talk about this. And I was like, okay, sure. And so I started talking about it, and then I started crying. And I was like, oh my God.
You're like, there it is. There it is. It's here.
And
We've arrived.
She looked at me, she was like, that was it. And I was like, okay, thank you. But it was just like things that I thought I already dealt with from my childhood, and in all reality, I did not. And then the crazy part about it is that night I had a dream, and there were two little girls in my dream, one that was full of rage and sadness, and one that was sinister.
Oh.
And I had to approach them both, and I had to talk to them, and I had to just say it's okay. And I ended up leaving both of them behind, like the sad pieces of it, and then just kind of ran to the one that was so happy or whatever. So it was an interesting like interaction and departure, but acceptance and forgiveness and being like it's okay and blah blah blah. So just like wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a beautiful thing. And there's so many things that you sort of talked about that touch on aspects of vulnerability that I think are so important to unpack. One being that sometimes we think that we did it, solved, I'm healed, I'm here, all done. Yeah. But healing work is not that simple, right? And sometimes the right time to heal, it's always the right time to heal, but sometimes we're not ready. Right. And we're not ready because there's still more to learn, there's still more to experience. Exactly. Other times how we perceive to have been healed, right? It's like, well, if I don't think about it every single day, then I must be over it. Until, we're in a similar situation that is similar in such a deeply rooted, intangible part of our beings that we don't even recognize that it's a pattern, right? We don't recognize, this is something familiar from my childhood or from my past. And so we're like, this is a new thing, when really it's like, not. No, it's just, and
a great way to even know that is if certain things within you trigger and certain like thoughts or feelings or something comes up, and a lot of times we don't really pay a lot of attention to the feelings that we get when we think about something, or when we come across something, or we meet someone that gives us a similar type of
like
vibe.
A vibe,
Like, what is happening? What is this? And I've been learning recently that there's just so much value in just feeling and then listening to feeling and
sitting with it.
I know, and I think a lot of times we try to be like, well, feeling's just a feeling, like feelings change and blah blah blah. Like we try to discredit the power of a feeling. And like especially whether or not you're a light worker, a healer, or just somebody who's just identifying as a man, woman, person, whatever it may be, like the feeling is so important. And trying to unpack feeling with logic, you're never going to win. Right. It's not supposed to be unpacked with logic.
Not with logic, right? And you can, if anything, if there's any sort of logic you can apply, it would be like the maybe categorization or whatever, right?
Facts, yes.
Like connecting.
Trying to understand the pattern there. Right.
But even then, all you're doing is connecting one feeling to another feeling. It's all about feelings, everybody. It's all about feelings.
Feelings are not bad.
Yes, they're not bad, and this is something, as much as I identify as a feeler, I've had to really recognize that it's not about feeling the good ones, or even I feel like sadness is one that I've become more familiar with, but there are other aspects of that, confusion, sitting with the unknowns. That's something I'm now years old, and I'm just now starting to get with, right? Sometimes feelings are not simple, sometimes they're complex, and even those can't be identified. So sitting with a question is in essence sometimes the first step to sitting with the feeling, because you may not know. You can't always identify like, oh, I feel this exact thing.
And just like sometimes there's no words that we can use that we understand, so we may categorize it as, oh, I'm just depressed, or oh, I'm just this, but maybe something greater than that. But each feeling is sending you a message, and that's what you have to be willing to sit with and just be like, I'm just going to allow this to happen, right? And another important thing I've been exploring recently is when you allow feelings to happen, don't attach yourself to them, and don't identify with it either. Just realize that it's there. So I think like even the power of like an I am statement, it's an identifier of like, I am this. Like I've had friends in the past that be like, I am just depressed all the time. Like I am like, or I'm a I don't know, just anything that they identify with that may not be what exactly they desire, what they really want with themselves, right? Yeah. And so they're like, well, I don't want to be this. And it's like, okay, but you're still saying that you are that. And so it continues to manifest because your mind is focused on what you don't want to be instead of focusing on what you want to be and what you actually already are. You just have to realize it. Right,
you're facilitating your own cycle and not allowing that sort of becoming to happen. Right, because it's like we always are what we are. It's a matter of allowing us to reveal. It's like the great reveal of the true self. I wish they could see this hand movement on the podcast.
We'll have the video to accompany.
Yes, there you go. And so much of that, I think, at times, I'll use sadness as a perfect example, or even anxiety, because I am always like, I'm an anxious person. It's so easy to identify with that.
I know. Yeah.
It's sometimes in an effort, because one of the basic, I think the simplest ways that we avoid sitting with a feeling is to try to numb it, push it away, change it, recategorize it, all these things. Like, I'm not deeply depressed, I'm just hungry. No, it's like you are feeling a real thing, right? Like,
I'm just angry today.
Exactly, I've just been hungry for 3 years straight. We lie to ourselves. Right? Like, it's not always just outward where we're like, oh, we tell this person that I'm just going through something right now. No, we tell ourselves the same things, right? And sometimes we think that we're doing ourselves a service, but that actually is a behavior that aligns with a lack of self-awareness.
Yes.
And you will believe yourself. If you say, I am whatever, right? You will begin to internalize that, and then that becomes your narrative, right? And how hard is it to rewrite the narrative when the author believes that to be true?
See that? Ooh. I'm sorry.
No.
That is so important. I mean, like, even so, I did a recent episode on limiting beliefs, and that just hits right on it.
Yes.
Like what we tell ourselves, like we all have our own beliefs and perceptions that we believe to be truth, and they're in some form our truth, but they could be completely false. Like just not true at all. And so it's like, especially when it comes to like imposing your opinions and perspectives on other people, like if that is what you believe, then that is your truth and that is your perspective, but it's not the truth and the belief and the perspective of somebody else. So that's actually, this is kind of randomly off topic, but not really.
No, it's all connected.
It makes me think about like in terms of like if if I identify like I'm a Christian and I'm Black and I'm a woman and I'm all these different things, but let's just say I have like really aggressive opinions and perspectives about everyone who's not that. And so then I impose that on them. That's not fair. Because even when you talked about the vulnerability piece and that we all have a deep piece of us that we're all connected to, if I'm walking into every single situation and be like, well, they don't look like me, they don't dress like me, they don't talk like me, they don't believe the same things as me, then we can't be friends, or we can't connect. And that's just like, I'm basically talking about the current state of our world.
No, that's real. And also, like, if you flip it on its head a bit, right? If you say that you identify as like a woman, a Christian, a Black woman, all these things, right? And you have a narrow belief of what that is.
Exactly.
Then
you put yourself in a box.
You put yourself in the box, and when it comes to growing or changing or even thinking different or perceiving yourself differently or accepting the ways in which you're evolving, it can be hard to do that if it's like, but wait a minute, I'm moving away from my own identity. I can't do that. So then I can't unpack this trauma, or I can't, distance myself from my pain because it's so deeply rooted falsely in these other aspects of my identity. I get it.
Oh man.
And it's crazy these days we can talk about them and intellectualize them, right? And it sounds like, oh my God, like we gotta figure out. I struggle with all of these things that I'm talking about day in and day out. And especially with like being honest with oneself and all of that. Because I'll sit here and be like, I'm all right. I'm all right.
Right. Like, I'm
fine. Yeah, I'm over it. I'm over all the things. And then you're like, you know, something happens, a trigger. Triggers are real, okay?
So real.
People jokingly talk about triggers as this like, you know, no, it's a very real thing. It's deeply rooted in our psyche and in our experiences, and we can heal from them.
I agree.
And sometimes, you know, healing isn't just, I'm going to make it so that this trigger doesn't trigger me. Sometimes it's a matter of, I'm going to build my coping skills up so profoundly, and I'm going to rewrite my narrative so much that I'm able to, even in the depth of that feeling, tell myself, no, I am, you know, worthy. I am loved. I am safe. I am all the things that those triggers may try to, unconvince. Is that a word? It's the word now. Unconvince myself of.
Yeah, it's like that processes of unlearning to relearn. Unlearning your opinions of self to then relearn your true self.
Yeah, deconditioning.
That whole, that's exactly what it is. It's kind of, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's a part of like the whole spiritual awakening complex of like, it happens, your brain's like, whoa. Oh my God, there's more to life than just this material presence that we have in this physical world. And then you eventually go into the dark night of the soul, which is like, everything is terrible. Yes. The world is terrible. You go through it, and then you come to this place where you're like, okay, like I'm coming past that deep despair that the world is a terrible place. Yes. But then you come to the part of realizing that you have to decondition. And you're not reconditioning yourself to anything at all. You're just opening yourself to a greater understanding, to be more compassionate and more loving and more everything else. So that's really like how I envision this whole journey of, once upon a time, we were like, vulnerability is for wusses.
Right. That's right. Not me. You ain't gonna catch me being vulnerable.
And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, please, listen to me. I want to behave. I have a story.
No, that's so real. And I think at some point in as we become ourselves and grow into ourselves and into our higher selves, I think that we start to seek the opposite of whatever we've learned as a child or as a, you know, I mean, I can't even say it's just about childhood versus adulthood, because there's whole grown people who, we're here for you. But we're here. We start to seek sort of the opposite. So maybe before we sought the person who is a little more stoic and like, no, repress, you know. Maybe now you see that person who's a little more honest, and even though maybe in the past you perceived them as intense, too much, I think those are things that are often applied to vulnerability as well.
I know, which is amazing.
They're like, oh, that's too much. It's like, is it that I'm too much, or are you feeling more than you'd want to feel right now?
Right,
you know?
Right.
We start to be drawn to that. And I think that happens on a subconscious level. We may be like, I'm healed, I'm perfect, there's nothing wrong with me, and I move through the world completely, you know, sane and quote unquote normal. But then you start to see that there are people who are tackling really difficult aspects of things that you may not even really be in your awareness yet, dictate every move that you make, and you start to be drawn to that. I don't know if it's like a cognitive, I feel like, do you know how the body, even though this is our temporary home, it does everything to heal itself. I think the spirit does the same in many ways.
I think it's just like a way for the spirit to talk to us. I mean, I definitely believe that it's operating through an energetic shift, right? So you begin to find yourself attracted to folks who are going through that very deep healing process within themselves, and they're actually willing to talk about their healing process. They're willing to talk about all the nitty-gritty things, and let you know that on the other side is actually quite beautiful. And that is, as you continue to learn how to heal yourself on emotional, physical, spiritual, and even soul levels, we're going to go very deep there, that as life continues to happen, you can continue to find other ways to adapt and to change and to understand how to increase, understand when to put up your energetic barriers, but also when to lift them down to open up to others and spread healing love, whatever. So it's a lot, and my brain started to go left as I was saying.
No, it's okay.
But no, this is awesome. I actually wanted to ask you about your book.
Oh, yes.
And what went into writing your book?
So it's so crazy when I put it together, I don't think many people knew that I was working on it. It was just one of those things. My whole life as a writer, when I was young, I was like, I want to write a book, and it's gonna be this big production. It's gonna be, I had these ideas in my mind of what that looks like, and what it feels like. And then it, of course, just didn't happen. And I realized I didn't know really what I wanted to put forth. And even as I was putting the project together, it was just coming out of me. My father had passed away, and it was, the kind of loss I had never experienced before. And I was very blessed because, when he was diagnosed with his condition, he had a rare skin cancer called Merkel cell carcinoma. We knew pretty soon, like after, doing some research, okay, this doesn't look good, and I had the very unique opportunity of really saying my goodbye in such a deep, layered, and beautiful way. Because we had about 8 months from diagnosis to his passing. So, and in that time, he and I spoke, and we connected as adults, which is so different, especially in that parent-child dynamic. And he sort of bestowed all this knowledge on me that at the time, not that I wasn't ready, but I was just like taking it in, digesting it, but I didn't really apply it to life just yet, because it was sort of like, I'm just gonna take whatever you have, For sure. He passed away initially. It was sort of a relief because he was so sick. And it wasn't a relief in that, like, oh, thank goodness. It was more like, we know you're not in pain and this hurts, but I'm able to sort of see that part. And that was in the end of August. Fast forward to December, I don't know what hit me, but I was just like, grief, like it was just very sudden, like a wave. And I learned it was ready to come. And I learned, and it came in the quiet. Right? Because think about it, when we move through life in the kind of society that we live in, where we're constantly plugged in, consistently connected, and that was one of my very first real lessons in sometimes that need for space and silence to really feel our feelings. And through that, I started unpacking all sorts of things. It's like, wow, we're in the grief room now. What else is living in here,
Let's just explore around.
Let's just look around. And, as you know, like, it's messy. Healing is not, people, I think, see healing and it's like love and light, and you're going to be walking through a field and your dreams are all going to be magical. No.
Where did that even come from?
Disney, maybe? Yeah, I'm not sure. I wonder often who heals that way. If you're out there, please. We want to hear from you. It wasn't like that. It was messy and scary, and there were a lot of unknowns, and there were a lot of like feelings of, this is it. This is my life now. This deep grief,
Right.
And there was a huge rejection of that sadness. And I realized that was a pattern in my life. Rejecting the sadness. No, I'm not going to feel that. Nope, I don't want that. That is not for me. And society teaches us that, right? Like, you should pursue your happiness, your best self, live your best life, #treat yourself, all these things, right? Without really taking into consideration what that looks like. And even when I think of like meditation and sort of that inner work, I think a lot of people at times can reject the idea because they have this false perception that it's sort of magical, or that it's not real, when it's the realest thing that can happen, right? To sit with yourself. So back to the book, a lot of that was what went into it. And so you see that the book sort of takes twists and turns. It talks a little bit about love, and there's moments of anger and self-awareness and almost denial. There's a little bit of everything in there. But in the intro to the book, I talk about my relationship with sadness and how for a long time I wanted to push it away. And then I got to a point where I felt like, no, it should be a welcome member of the family and allow it to sit at the table. And you talked a little bit earlier about sort of over-identifying with things. And I did get to a point where I was like, I became so familiar with sadness. It was like, okay, well, I conquered it, right? Achievement unlocked. I'm just going to live here. And I was afraid to feel other things because it was like, wow, it was really hard to accept this. What if I let it go and forget how? And there was, so I was like, I am the queen of sadness. I am the queen of darkness. And for many people, that was helpful. But over time, it was like, Lisa, is this good for you to stay stuck here?
Exactly. That's good.
So the book did allow me to sort of release some of that. And I did, I dreamt a lot of my father. I dream a lot. Yeah. And I'm starting to find that that's a common thing with us fellow feelers.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't fully say, dreams mean this or they mean that. Mm-hmm. Is it psychological overflow? Is it symbolic? Is it... I think much like anything in life, right? When we think of the core values of it, it's all about how we choose to perceive and how we choose to categorize and the power we give it.
Right.
And I do believe it's a little bit of both. I think our dreams can be telling us something that we maybe can't access in our wakeful state, or awakened state. When we awake,
are right now.
Exactly. This state of being. But I dreamt of my father, and initially there were dreams where he wouldn't speak to me, but he would be laughing. Like I could feel his energy.
Oh, interesting.
And then over time I started to have sort of more concrete dreams, which I did write about a little bit in the book. Nice. But he, it was almost like I needed his permission or something to let go and to move on. And he had been a figure in my life who so often guided me through those complex emotions because he talked about them in a very, everything for him was funny. Everything was a joke, right? He was very humorous. And I carry some of that, admittedly. And I think it was because he, whether consciously or subconsciously, acknowledged that making something lighter always makes it easier to carry.
Right.
So I got a little bit more in touch with that. And I think in this book, I delve into that a little bit. But in the introduction, I talk about how, when we if we spread our sadness over ourselves evenly like a cape, it makes it a little lighter to carry. Right. And the goal was to sort of acknowledge its existence and not get stuck, not live there. Yes. I also touch a little bit on mental health and mental illness and the awareness of that. Because I think we often, there are times where there really is a neurological, chemical cause of some of our pain, and to pretend that isn't true can do more harm than good. Yes. And so striking a balance between what can I control and what can't I, or even having an awareness of maybe my brain lies to me all the time, but what can I do? I'm not powerless, right? Yeah. What can I do? Yeah. Even if it's this much, if I can do that full amount, I can help myself,
Yeah, at the end of the day, what I've learned through kind of my readings and teachings or whatever it may be, I learned that the brain is really just meant to be a tool to translate whatever the soul is trying to emit to this realm. Yeah. So essentially, we a lot of the times are now in some way run by our brains. Yeah. But it's supposed to be the other way around. We're supposed to be running our brains and then allowing it to emit whatever we need it to emit. Yeah. So even if we're taking small steps to try to say, well, my brain is telling me that I'm worthless, but I know that I'm not, so I am worthy, right? And so eventually you begin to create new pathways, neural pathways in your brain.
That's right,
and
the synapses of the brain.
Right, and the more you keep traveling down that path and less down the other path legit will start to kind of dissipate, and it'll just kind of turn into other nutrients for the body.
Yeah, it falls to the back.
Yeah, it's so that's called neuroplasticity. Yeah. I actually recently learned of that, and I was like, this is crazy. I'm gonna try it out.
This is complex and amazing.
Yeah, and it's just the power of what our actual physical brain organ can do, and then the power of how our thoughts can actually create that new generation and release of what is old, but bringing in what is new. Yeah. So that's it may take a while to keep convincing yourself that you're actually worthy and you're powerful and you have control of your brain. Yeah. But it's just that practice every day, that diligence and that consistent is what can actually change.
Absolutely. Yes. And that, that speaks to the science of how trauma works to begin with, right? The brain gets rerouted to protect itself, to protect its subject. And that's why we start to perceive dangers that, at one point in time, it's this is self-protective, but then as time passes and now you're in a safe place, it starts to work against you.
Exactly.
And rerouting. And I don't remember where I heard this, about the brain being Teflon for the good and Velcro for the bad. So we have to repeat the good things 10 times as much as the bad things in order for them to stick. Right. And I try to tell myself that, because it's easy to lose faith where you're I told myself I was worthy 50 times. Why don't I feel worthy? And then it's work, right? And it's being committed to that. Yes. Yeah, totally.
And being committed to yourself. Like, I think we begin to project this sense of commitment and we put it on other people and other things and we forget that we still need to put that same effort to ourselves. And once we really start doing that and unlocking these different pieces of ourselves, literally our outside life will begin to shed in ways that we never imagined, and that might be scary, but then what comes our way is like greater than what we could have ever imagined as well. So it's a weird, interesting pattern. Like, I can say even in my own personal journey, you know, once I began to really accept the fact that I needed to shift, things that I was very latching onto, like people, past relationships, like thoughts of myself and thoughts of how things are supposed to go, how dating's supposed to go, how my relationship with my parents is supposed to go, like how job is supposed to go, like how painting is supposed to go, for me, how creating anything's supposed to go, like all that was like, girl, you need to let go of that, let go of that, let go of that.
And that's hard, right? When we attach ourselves to anything, it can be, I mean, anything. If you're attached enough, it's difficult to let go of. It's hard. And you can look at, I mean, I think of like objects. I don't know if you've been seeing, there's a lot of like people are in this place of like purging their homes.
Yes.
And I'll see it, I'm like, this shirt that I haven't worn in 9 years that doesn't fit me and is not flattering and I don't even like it.
Right.
But it has this sort of falsely constructed sentimentality there.
Yeah.
And the same happens with people, places, things, patterns, cycles. You know, we can even be visibly aware that, okay, this cycle isn't good for me.
Right. This
is hurting. This doesn't feel right. And I'm back in the loop, right? You know, because sometimes it's easier to just do what you know.
Yeah, there we go. Getting out of that comfort zone. It's like if you think of like multiple bubbles building up on themselves, we're like, this is the little comfort zone. You gotta come out. Oh, now we're in the fear zone. Okay, keep coming out. Woo, yeah, we conquered it. You know what I mean? But definitely, and even one thing I learned during the path of like getting out of the comfort zone and then conquering like these fears and these barriers that I'm realizing that I've set in myself a long time ago, or that were placed on me based on whatever childhood beliefs I was digesting really aggressively. I found myself coming out of them like, whoa, I didn't know I could come out of this sad feeling, or I no longer have to feel like I didn't belong, or that now I actually do belong. And, like I feel great, and like what's happening? Like I'm so used to feeling sad that I'm not sad anymore. What do I do?
Right, and sometimes there's that adjustment period. There are moments where, you know, I'm going through a breakup, and there's moments where I'm like, oh, I feel good today. Is it over? It's not over. Is it over? Am I allowed to feel this? You know, and because we're afraid that like, oh no, the sadness is right around the corner. And sometimes it is, and that's okay. But sometimes it's not, right? And you get out of it, and you're so accustomed to being in that place that once you evolve out of it, you're like, oh, I can move out here, and I can be, you know, there's so many possibilities. There's so much I couldn't see because I was on the other side of the wall.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's real.
Wow. Okay. So this is so great. We touched on so much. I love this. So I'll ask you. So for someone who is struggling right now to accept themselves or to move on from a situation that could be a toxic pattern, a toxic person, a toxic place, whatever it may be, but they want to, but they're just not sure how. They're having struggles. Like what would you tell that person?
Okay. This is okay. I mean, I think of something a very good friend recently actually said to me, and that I've been sort of latching onto, is this idea that we're afraid to lose, right? And we need to really think about, what are we losing, right? What are you losing if you remove yourself from this toxic pattern? You think, okay, the most logical thing would be, well, no, it's the good things, it's the love. But that love isn't gone, right? Because it's in you, because you put it there. So you take it with you. You know, we might be attached to, let's say it's a person. Oh, I lose their love. Their love isn't gone either. You know, even if you perceive your access to it has changed, those things that you've experienced, those memories, they stay with you. The good things, the things that you've learned, stay with you. And honestly, those bad things and the lessons that they brought into your life, those stay with you too. You're not really losing anything. it's okay to acknowledge that there is a loss and a shift and a change in your day-to-day, of course. And you might say, okay, I'm losing that version of myself, that version of this relationship,
like
you know?
Version.
I'm losing. So it's not, I don't want to reduce it to and say there's no loss. Of course there's loss.
Right.
But we're not losing the things we necessarily think we are.
Right.
And just sit with that and ask yourself, like, what am I really afraid of? What's the worst that can happen? I mean, I'll be honest. When I ask myself that, I can take some pretty deep dives. And what will happen? And let's say that these things were true. Now what? What are we gonna do? Right? And what is within my control and what isn't? Right. I think those are things that we can hyper focus on the little bit of things we can't control. How they feel. Right. What about their feeling? What are they thinking? And when you're healing and trying to remove yourself from a really difficult, toxic situation, you really have to focus on you.
Yes.
You know, and that's hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
Oh man.
Because you just want to be like, what's on their mind?
Yeah.
What are they thinking? Yeah. What do they think about that thing that I said and that other thing that I said? And are they blaming me? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
And sometimes we attach ourselves to those things. Yes. It's like we find a new thing. Well, I can't attach myself to you, but I'm going to attach myself to all these other random things that I have no control over, and there's nothing I can really do except focus on my own healing. What did I learn? What is this pain teaching me?
Yes. There we go.
Yeah, that's not easy, because sometimes the pain is teaching you that maybe you need to change a little bit. Which is where I'm at, you know? Right. But that's a gift too, right? When we're learning that there's things we maybe didn't do so right. I try not to call things right or wrong. Right. Because that's just relative. A paradigm. Right, and that's sort of a dynamic that I don't, it is, so it's just what's true and not, right? And thinking about what way can I grow and change so that this pattern doesn't repeat itself again. Because imagine going through all of the labor to get out of a cycle, to get over the person, to do all those things, to end up right back again in that same pattern. Yeah. You know, and we don't always even recognize it. It could be 6 years later. If you don't heal from whatever it is that keeps you stuck, you're going to live it again. Yeah. And the pain isn't going to be less, you know? Sometimes it's more. Exactly. Wow. And that's kind of limited in scope, but I feel like generally when you're suffering and when you're in pain and you think this is it, there's no end in sight. Right. There is. And think about times that you've survived before. Right. Sometimes it's just a bad night and you're like, this is it. This is where it ends. I can't survive. I'm so lonely. I'm so tired. I'm so whatever you're feeling. Yeah. And the sun shines again the next day. Right. It comes. It always comes. Right. But, sit with it, recognize it when it arrives, and be like, okay, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and it's okay that this is sad. It's okay to acknowledge loss. It's okay to acknowledge pain. And can I have the other things if I'm holding on so tightly to this? Mm-hmm. Is there room for it? Mm-hmm. Am I making room for the things that I really want? Mm-hmm. And is it because I don't believe that those things can come to me?
Where is the greatest weight of your focus?
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yes. Where is the greatest weight of your focus? Absolutely. Yes. Wow. And there's a big theme right now amongst me and my friends about making space, holding space. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're so quick to fill the space. It's like, oh, I have this space. Let me just put stuff in it. Whatever. Yeah, because when there's nothing there, it's just us. Right. And really it's not about, if this is blank, then, it means no one loves me, or there's no, really it's about, when there's nothing here, I actually have to sit with myself, and that feels uncomfortable. I'd rather put something else there.
Right. I've definitely done that before too. Especially when you're progressing on like the self-healing journey, and you're like, oh wow, I finally went through that grueling phase of dealing with that issue, and now I have space. Mm-hmm. I put in this space, and so you're like, I'm gonna put something random in this space, maybe have a person entertain you or whatever it may be, whatever you decide to put in your space. Yeah. And then out of nowhere, something else is like, no, we need this space. Yes. You need to heal through this, and I was like, oh my god. Yeah. I wasn't ready. My journey has definitely been one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and I've literally had to just surrender to acceptance and forgiveness. And forgiveness more than just saying I forgive you, like forgiveness like okay. I forgive you. Just really and then really feeling what that feels like, and just also having gratitude
Yes.
For allowing yourself to go through that really tough and difficult process of acceptance.
Yes.
Of inviting sadness to the table.
Yeah.
Of inviting whatever it may be to the table to be there.
Yeah.
And you're like, I accept your presence here, and I accept that you've played a role in this journey. I do not latch onto you. I observe you from more of like an objective point of view, and I continue to move forward. And I know that each one of these emotions, these feelings, these thoughts, these patterns, they served some sort of a purpose in this life that I'm living, and I'm going to continue to see everything as a lesson. Like there's always light and beauty in the suffering that we feel, so we should never push it away, but just allow it to exist. And that can be really hard to actually accept and be grateful for suffering, no matter how terrible the suffering is.
It's hard. I mean, and that all comes to us being reactionary as humans, right?
Yeah.
I react to God is working on me. But, you know, it's all about resisting that need, because whether it's good or bad, we want to be like, oh, you know, I have a reaction to this. This is definitely one on my list of things I'm working on. It's about just allowing things to kind of float around us. Even the planets interact with one another in a way, and there's no, you know, and even when things are like, you know, there's a meteor coming this way, you don't see a seismic shift happening, right? It happens, and then whatever comes of it. I think that we as humans struggle with that a little bit, where we're like, you know, even if it's love, someone new comes in, okay, I have to just build it up and overexert my emotional energies, and then now I'm not being authentic because there's it's all performative, and I just want to be impressive, and I'm doing the dance and doing the thing, when really if we just allow ourselves to be and let time do what time does. Even though time's a social construct, but that's a whole other issue. That's fine. That's another episode. But if we just allow, you know, existing with one another to just do what it does and be what it is, we organically arrive in a different place.
We do.
But we react to our pain, we react to our joy, we react, and it's natural, it's human. Forgive yourself. Yeah. But try to just sit. Yeah. You know. Yeah. It's hard.
A better consciousness of the reactions that you have, and try to have more of an objective point of view, especially as you go through your growth pattern, because eventually, like, some of the things that happened before that had evoked some sort of reaction from you, whether or not you're angry, sad, happy, whatever it may be, it may happen again in the future. And what's important to use then is like present moment consciousness. It's like, oh my God, this same thing's happened before, but how am I going to react? Am I going to get angry this time, or am I going to sit back and be like, huh, very interesting. Let me take this back home and process it. And then we'll come out with a different understanding this time.
Absolutely. Right? And be comfortable with processing. I think in giving things time. I think, and this is something I admittedly also struggle with. I'm big on processing and revisiting. I'll revisit things to death. But allowing yourself to change your mind too, because I think sometimes in our processing, what we end up doing is just looking for things that justify whatever our beliefs are. Right. Try to open your mind and allow yourself to see things through different perspectives, and take breaks too. If something important. I mean, there's we have limits in all aspects, right? And if something is, if you're not coming to an answer, maybe you're not meant to right now. And we can sit with the unknown for a little bit.
And sometimes some things I do as well, when I'm really unsure, I literally would just ask myself the question. Maybe I'm sitting in silent meditation, or I'm just walking down the street, and I'm like, you know what, like, I've been struggling with this, so I'm just gonna ask myself. So I'm basically asking my spirit self, hey, how can I get through this? Or like, what is the answer to this? Or can you show me, you know, from point A to point B steps on what I should be doing? And eventually things just start to unfold in front of me, or I start to receive some sort of interesting, like, impulsive urges to do something, or some sort of guidance that doesn't really make any logical sense, but I'm just like, well, I asked the spirit in the universe for help, so I might as well. I don't see how this thing is going to hurt me. It seems it's going to help me a lot. So let me just listen. And then once you allow yourself to listen, you're like, I'm so glad I listened. Because I did ask for assistance, and the assistance came. And that is the form that it came in.
And things will come through, you know, trusted channels that we don't realize are trusted channels, because our awareness of it is so beyond, or so in a different place, that it's hard for us to see the connection between things. we can, and that speaks a little bit to limited thinking.
Right.
Also, you know, the one thing I'd like to touch on a little bit is the judgment piece. We make judgments and because judgment is protective, right? It does have its role, and just like we honor sadness, and that sadness allows us to release things, we look at judgment. It's like, oh, judge me. You judge you. There's something wrong with you, and it's like, no, you know, judgment keeps us alive, right? Judgment allows us to know, is this safe? Is this not? And the same way, though, we judge others, we should try to be aware that we're judging ourselves in those same ways. And just as limiting as the judgment of others, especially false judgments, right? We're making assumptions. That's a whole other thing. If we're making assumptions of others and drawing conclusions that are based on these assumptions, that can be very, very damaging to others, to our relationships with them, and our ability to connect with them. We do that to ourselves too, and probably more often than we even can acknowledge. And that can be a barrier too. If you're trying to sit with vulnerability, and maybe you needed to cope a little bit yesterday, and now today you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I shouldn't have done that.
That's you just judging yourself and not accepting the fact that you needed to go through that yesterday. Or
you needed an escape for the moment, or you needed to, you know. So I think of more tangible things like people who are trying to quit smoking cigarettes, for example. They're like, well, I smoked one, guess it's over, can't do it, you know. and you will feel that way in your journey of healing as well, where you're like, oh, I made a mistake, or I fell into some sort of pattern that I've done before. It's too late, it's broken, I ruined it, ruined my healing, I can't move forward. But that's not true, right? Forgive yourself and allow yourself being that we are in our present state human beings, right? Allow yourself the space to be that.
That's very important and very powerful, because I know even in my experience, I've been like, oh my God, no, you did it again, you caved.
You caved.
What did you do? And then the other part of me is like, it's okay, just chill, boo. You caved, but let's get back on the path. And that's what it's about. Like, even when I was learning various meditation techniques, and we're just talking about the basic awareness one, and let's just say you're like, I want to focus on my breath, so I want to focus on my nostrils, or what the breath feels like going in and out, or whatever it may be. And then your mind just starts to wander, go like, and you're just like, oh no. And what's recommended is to just very gently and calmly bring your awareness back to your breathing. And it's a very simple thing, very easy to do, but when our minds begin to go out, we're like that squirrel complex, oh my God, squirrel! We can get very upset with ourselves, and then maybe bring ourselves out of that entire meditative practice.
Absolutely.
When our goal is to maybe start meditating because our mind is so man. We don't have such control over our emotions, and we're so judgmental all the time, and we want to see what that could do to us. Well, it's okay if you veer off for a moment. Just bring yourself back, but do it gently and kindly, and use kind words to yourself.
Absolutely, because again, back to those narratives, right? We start telling ourselves, you know, if I fell off once, oh, it's because I can't meditate. I can't do this. I'm not good at this. This is never going to work for me. I'm not a person who does X, Y, Z.
I do this all the time.
Oh, I do too. I'm like, I don't understand feelings. When in reality it's like, that's not true. And you're reducing your entirety to one instance. Which is really the thing that breaks us in judgment at all. That we reduce the entirety of something to something very small, to a very minor perspective. Forgiveness of self and patience with yourself. Being patient with yourself. You're essentially a child, and treat yourself as such, right?
I met my younger self, 2 versions of them last night, y'all, so it's real. It's okay.
It's so real. It's so real. And what are our needs except the very needs we had as children not realized, right?
Wow.
It's
I'm sorry, this experience.
It's like, it's real. It's like, you know, and I recently was speaking to someone on a similar subject, just all that's all that it really comes down to. It's all it really is. And when we identify that as such and get in touch with that inner child, our inner self, we do ourselves more of a service that way. We're able to move further and closer towards healing, and also closer towards self-forgiveness, because we're able to say, okay, a child thinks like a child, right? And some of those core needs are very fundamental. They're very simple. And we live in a world that tells us that as adults we're not allowed to have that. We should be completely autonomous beings that never engage with anyone else ever. You're supposed to meet your inner needs on your own, which is true. but it's very short-sighted in many ways, the things that we're taught. And so we have to, it all comes back to realizing the connectivity of everything, how everything is interconnected, and it's all... Yeah. I've gone way off, as you know.
Oh, it's fine.
And then I was...
Fine. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start to wrap up some.
Yeah.
If folks want to know where to find your book, where can they find it? And can you give us the title? And
yes.
everything?
So the book is called On Wearing Sadness Like a Cape, and it's a collection of poetry. I actually have a website, poemsandpaintbrushes.com.
Okay.
You can find me on Instagram, Poems and Paintbrushes. And if you send me a direct message or an email, if you let me know, hey, I heard about your book on this podcast, I will gladly email you the ebook so that you can check it out, and hopefully you'll connect to the work.
Yeah, I definitely was reading. I'm almost done.
Oh.
And I was just like, oh my God. This is great. I have to bring this up. So,
good. I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful piece of work.
Of course.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Oh man. Okay. Well, we could go on a rant forever if we truly wanted to, but I'm gonna save everyone on this side of the screen, and we'll close out. So I guess, is there anything else lasting that you would like to leave our lovely listeners with?
Be gentle with yourself.
I love that. That is a constant thing I'm doing with myself too. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening in to another interview on the power of vulnerability. As you can see, it's truly amazing work, and if we allow ourselves to be raw, to be vulnerable, to be very true and honest with ourselves, so much can happen, and our lives can change in miraculous ways.
Yes.
So, as always, learn, share, and grow with your pals, family, whatever your network is, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Bye, guys. Namaste. Bye.